Alright, I haven't uploaded on my channel for a while, so I just decided to make a video on how I started scripting. I've had a lot of people ask me on my Twitch how I started scripting and what videos I followed or what pages I followed. So I'll just be teaching you the way I was taught right from the beginning. And hopefully that will help you all understand a little bit more of coding and a little bit more, where to start and what to start with. Now, depending on the approach you want to take down the line, for example, FPS game, RPG game, platformer, it doesn't really matter. You all want to start at something very basic. For example, what I did was a simulator. Now, I'm not talking about high-end simulators like Lumberjack Tycoon, Slayer Tycoon, or even the Naruto Tycoon that I played today. What we're doing is a simple clicker tycoon, which will teach you most of the basics that you need to know. So, let's start with the interface, to be fair. So let's pretend you're new to Roblox Studio entirely. So I didn't know what most of this stuff was, and I got somewhat overwhelmed. Now, most of this you don't really need to worry about. The most you need to worry about are the ones that I'm about to turn on. So, Explorer, Properties, Toolbox, Output. Those are the main ones you really want to focus on. Toolbox mainly so you can get assets like builds and just whatever you might need. Explorer so you can navigate your studio much easier, so you can add stuff to, for example, the different tabs that you need to work on. And then the properties, so you can actually look at the properties of each individual object you add to your studio. Now, don't worry about what all of these do for now. I'll be explaining them as we go. But let's start with the Home tab. So the Home tab is basically where you'll have most of your main primary buttons that do stuff. So over here, these four, select, move, scale, and rotate, are your main tools, for example. So if we add a part real quickly, that's what this does. And if you click down here, you can select different types of parts. So you have a sphere, a wedge, and a cylinder. So you can use all of these to your disposal. Now, the select tool is basically so you can just click on anything and move it around however you want, but you can't really go up or down. You can just go to where your cursor is currently. The move tool is a little bit more advanced for moving, so you can move in whatever axes you want, up, down, left, right, forward, backwards, whatever floats your boat. And you can even just, without clicking on any of the axes, you can just click and just hold like you would with select. Scale is so you can scale it in whichever axis you want, and if you hold shift, for example, and then just click and hold this one, it basically scales it on each axis, so you can just get something very big without having to manually increase it like this. So you can just do it with a push of a button. Now if you want to revert something that you've recently done that you don't like, you can just hold Ctrl Z or click on this backwards button, and it's just gonna go backwards to undo the changes you just made. And then with, for example, if I move this and then go back, you can even go forward again, so that you can just undo your undo. So yeah, and then the rotate tool is just for rotating your part. Now, the editor's terrain, which you don't really need to worry about, and I'm not going to go over this in any of my tutorials. UI, this is just for UI stuff, which we will get in later. Oops. Material, I believe this is if you have a part selected and then you click on a material, you can change that material right away. Yeah, there you go, see? Same with the color, so for example, if I select green, change that color right away here. So that's what that does. Lock is if you click on it and then click on a part and then you lock it, you basically can't select it by any means. You have to select it through the Explorer. Same can be done with unlocking it. And you can see now I can actually select it again. Anchor is when you want a part to be fixed at a position. So for example, if I have anchor on, you can see it does not fall, has no physics, like it doesn't fall. But if I unanchor it and I run it again, you can see it's gonna fall. You know, it's not anchored anymore, it's not set there. Group I will not go over yet. Actually wait, this is a different type of group. Yeah, this is just if you want to weld them on. Okay, my bad, I was thinking of something way differently. But a group is if you want to group multiple parts, like say we have multiple parts. The extension for duping something like this in the spot is Control D. If you click Control D while having something selected, you do this basically. Selecting all of them and pressing Control G will group it all together into one single model, so it's easier to move around. Control U ungroups it, so it's all separate models again. So yeah, this is basically all that I'll be going over here. This right here, you won't need to worry about. Except for this one maybe. The spawn, this just makes a spawn pad with the properties you have in here. Ignoring this, just this right here. So yeah, that's what that does. And then effects is if you want to add an effect to something. For example, I want to add fire to this part. Add fire to this part. I want to add a beam. You know, add a beam, which doesn't work because we don't have any attachments. So you don't have to worry about that. Or I want to add a particle emitter. Now there's a particle emitter inside of my part. There we go. You see now there's a particle emitter in my part. So yeah, alright, let's go on to the more coding part of the game. So, what we're going to be doing is a simple simulator, a clicker simulator, which is what I started with actually. So, like the title of this video, I will teach you the way I was taught, or the way I taught myself to code, and this will hopefully start your journey in coding. So what I first learned was how to make a leader stats, which is basically where all of your like money, gems, service mic and mic, everything will be stored. So what we will start with is just a folder, because it's always nice to have everything like stored and, how do I say this? Just not manage, just have everything organized. There you go. We want everything organized. So we'll just call this main script. This is not something I learned in the beginning, but I'm teaching you guys this now in the beginning, so it's easier for you down the line. So always keep everything organized. Actually, we'll call this player stats, this folder. Inside of a folder, we'll add a script. Now there's two types of scripts. There is a local script and there is a normal script. So what the difference between those two is in simpler terms, this script one runs on the server while this runs on the client. Now what the difference between these two is if I jump into the game real quickly. So this is the client. So for example, if I remove something from my client, for example, this spawn point, right? And I jump into the server, you can see that the spawn point is still there, right? But it's not here for the client. Now, if I add a part, or a cylinder in this case, so let's just say it's hidden by this, we can still see it on our end. So anything that the client does is most likely not replicated on the server, depending on how it's being removed. So always when you change values, or if you remove something that everyone should see, do it on the server. If you only want a certain thing to happen for a player, for example removing a wall or some shit like that, do it on the client. Now I don't know how else to explain this, so you probably have to get more in depth of that by Google searching, but that's the best example I can give you. Now we want to make a server script because we want to give these stats to every single player that joins the game. So we'll call this script leader stats. If you want to change the name, you can either press and then press F2, or you can go down here and change the name here. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is checking whenever a player gets added to our game, by either means of resetting or a player just joining the game. So what we will be doing is we're going to be doing game, which is our game, dot players, which is basically every single player, dot player added, which is basically whenever a player gets added, connecting that into a function, and then adding the player as a variable here. What this basically does is whenever a player gets added, we store it here, and then we can do whatever we want with it. So for example, if you want to check the player's name, we'll do player.name, or we do print player.name. Now write everything as I am writing it, capitals, lower cases, everything. Alright, I cannot stress this enough. Write it as I write it, otherwise it might break. What print does basically is whatever we put in between these parentheses or whatever you call them, it gets displayed here in our output. So as you can see, it printed our name because we are the ones that just joined. Now as you can see, my name is Ducky, right? But it printed Ravenous Duck. That's because I am getting my actual name and not my display name, which my actual name here is Ravenous Duck. Now if you want to display their display name, what you would do is just do display name instead of name. Now as you can see, that will print Ducky, right, which says right here. Now what we want to be using is the name. We do not want to be using the display name by any means, because I can just change at any moment and then it might break. So always use the name. So what we want to do is create a folder inside of a player where we will be storing all of our values. So our money, gold, rebirths, so on and so on. The way we do that is local, and then let's do leader stats, which this is just a variable which we can call wherever in the script. So then after the equal sign, we'll do instance.new string, or whatever you call these squiggly things, these, yeah, and then folder. What this does is we're creating a new instance, aka object, or whatever you want to call it, which is a type of folder. So we're creating a folder inside of nothing at the moment because we don't have a parent set. Go a line down, we type leader stats, dot parent is equal to the player. So what this does is we're taking our leader stats, right, the folder we just created, and we're parenting it to the player. Now there's an easier way of doing this is by going outside of this right here, outside of this last squiggly shit, yeah, putting a comma and putting player right afterwards. That will parent it right away, so we don't have to write any other code. Now by default it's gonna have the name folder, but we want to call it leader stats. So what we would be doing is do leader stats dot name equal to string, like this string thingy, and then we'll just call it leader stats. Oops, leader stats. There you go. So if you go test this out, you'll see nothing really has changed. You know, nothing visibly has changed. Also ignore these are from plugins, so don't worry about anything that shows in my output apart from when I actually show you guys it. But if we go inside of our player, you can see there's a folder called leader stats in here now. So this means that it worked. So if you have a folder called leader stats in your player right here under players, your name, and then leader stats, then you did it right so far. Now let's actually start making a currency. So we go a few lines down, then we type local, let's just call this money, which is equal to instance.new string, and let's do an int value, so that's int value. This is basically a whole number, so 1 to infinite. So but integers cannot have, or an int value cannot have like a decimal, so you can't do 1.23 or 1.7, you can't do that. It always has to be a whole number. However, if you want decimals, you'll have to be using a number value, not a number position, but a number value. This will allow you to put as many, numbers after died as you want. This doesn't have to be a whole number. But since we are working with full numbers, we're just going to be using integer. So int value. And this will be parenting to the leader stats. So the code will be local money is equal to instance.new, and these brackets, parentheses, not parentheses, but the string thing, yeah, int value, comma, leader stats. Now we also want to name it. So money.name is equal to string money. And then we also want to set a default value, which we can do by doing money dot value is equal to 0, right? So since it's a value, there will always be a dot value behind it. So money dot value is equal to 0. So when we actually reference this later, we'll always have to put dot value. It's just so we can actually use it, which I'll be showing you guys more in depth later. So if we go ahead and play test this real quickly, you'll see that we have money next to our name now. So now our money is going to start getting stored, which is nice. So depending on how you want your money to be gained, either by a UI button or a tool, we'll be doing it through a UI button since that's a little bit easier than doing it through a tool. So inside of our storage UI, which is this right here under server storage, we'll be adding a Screen Gui, which is basically our root to any UI we want to be adding. So just call this main GUI. Inside of our main GUI, we'll be adding a, what do we want to add? Let's add a text button. By click on the text button right here, we can just align it to the middle, giving it like a little different size, it looks like a little bit more like a button. And then we won't be getting into customizable, like customizing UI or anything. If you want me to go over customizing UI and what you can do with UI, drop it down in the comments and I'll make a tutorial on it. But for now, we'll only be changing the text to just say gain money. There you go. So now what we want to do is when we click this, we get money. So let's add a script inside of our text button. So inside of here, now some people may say don't use server scripts for UI because it doesn't work, which is dumb because it does work. I don't know what people are saying, but it might not be the cleanest by any means. Some may not recommend you using server scripts for buttons. Some people are just gonna do it through other means and stuff. But this is how I started, so I'll show you what I did when I started. So inside of our server script, we'll be referencing the player first. So the way I started referencing the player, and the only way I remember currently, because I don't remember much, is by doing local player is equal to. Now, a little tip with how to handle UI. So ignore the errors that are gonna come because I didn't finish my statement there, but instead of a player, it's not called storage GUI, it's called player GUI. So when referencing the player, you always want to do player.player GUI, not player.storage GUI, otherwise it doesn't work. Because I see a lot of people doing that mistake and getting hella frustrated with it, but never use storage GUI, always use player GUI. So if you want to get the player, you can see that our text button is right here. So we want to go from our script all the way to our player. So the way we do that is by counting. So we're going to be doing script.parent until we get to our player. So the way we do that is from the script, 1 parent, 2, 3, let's pretend this is player GUI because at the end of the day it is going to be player GUI. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's going to be 4. Why is it 4 not 3? It's because the third parent is the storage GUI, which is player GUI, and the player's GUI parent is the player. So this is how you can get the player. So now that we've got the player, now someone in the comments is gonna say, there's an easy way of doing this, but I cannot remember by the life of me what it was. Let me actually check. I might find it in here somewhere. Button handler. Nope. Where would I have used it? Because I don't think there's any scripts left of mine in here, is there? Okay, this is not a good example. Alright, I cannot find it. But yeah, this is how we can get the player for now. And then what we also want to do is get the button. So local button, which is the variable, is equal to script.parent. So the script's parent is the button. Now we want to check whenever someone clicks on the button. So we would do button.mouse button 1 down. Right, so this is when the first mouse button, which is just your left click, is down. So when it's pushed down, we want to connect that into a function. Now if you want to read about what connect does, you just have to put in this and then it tells you what it does. But this one is zoomed out a little bit, you won't be able to see much. So if we just do that, you can see connects a given function to the event and returns whatever this says that represents it. So basically, use connect. I don't know how else to explain this. Connect is always what's needed after certain functions. You'll learn this as you go. So yeah, when we click on the button, you know, we want stuff to happen. So we're gonna first be checking if we have a player. So if player, then continue. If we have a player, then we're going to do local leader stats, which is equal to player.leader stats. Then if we have leader stats, then we continue. So the way if statements work is basically we're asking the code or the game if we have whatever we put here. So if we have something, then we continue. Otherwise, don't continue the line. So we're just checking here that we have what we're asking for. So for example, we're asking for the player here. We're checking if we have a player. If we have, then we continue. We check if we have a leader stats. If we have a leader stats, then we continue. So if we have a leader stats, what we're going to be doing is leader stats dot money. Now always make sure when you call your currency inside of a code, never try find it with the name we put as a variable. Always do it as the actual name, so capital M. And then we do dot value plus equal to 1. So we're grabbing the current value and plussing it by whatever number we want here. So if we go try this out, we should see that you can see the more we click on it, the faster we click, the more money we get. Now, let's just say you want to add a cooldown to this. Let's just say you don't want people to click at max speed, because if we just, for example, let me just cut that real quickly. I'll just get myself my auto clicker out real quickly. So, we have a little auto clicker here. Let's make it, you know, do that. Double. Click F6. You can see we're getting money at max speed. So we want to add a cooldown to this. So up here we're going to do local debugs, which is just a variable name. You can just call this cooldown delay. Do not call it delay actually. No click yes. Boonga boonga. You can call it whatever you want. So let's just call it for usability cooldown equal to false. So we're just making a boolean, which is just true or false. A boolean is always true or false, which by default the cooldown is false. So which means it's clickable. Or you can make it true. You can do whatever. You can do whichever way you want. But for this, we'll just do it false by default. Once we have the leader stats, we're gonna do another if statement, checking if the cooldown, if the cooldown is equal to false. Now, when you're checking for a boolean or for a value in an if statement, there's always two. So there's always two equal signs. But then if you're setting it, there's always just one. So for example, if I wanted to set the leader set to 1, we would just do equal. So yeah, keep that in mind. So if cooldown is equal to false, then we set cooldown to true. We grab the leader stats. You know, we put that back in there. We do task.wait 1. So this will just wait 1 second. And then we set cooldown back to false, which means we can actually click on this again after a second has passed. So for example, now if you click, you know, we can't click on max speed and you can hear me clicking, but it's only going up after every second. So yeah, even if we do my auto clicker, you can see it's still just doing a one by every 1 second. So that's how you can add a cooldown. Now you can change this number to whatever you want. So if you want the cooldown to be half a second, we would do 0.5, which is basically 0.5, which is half a second. So then if you put it on an auto clicker, you can see we're getting it a little bit faster than we did usually. Now to show you this in a better extent, we can put this to 0.1, which is 0.1. And then if you turn on auto clicker, you can see we're getting it a lot quicker. Still not as fast as we would get it if we didn't have a cooldown at all. So there you go. So this is how you can add a cooldown to your clicking. Now let's just say we want a certain region to give more clicks per second. So, or more clicks whenever we click this, or more money whenever we click. So in here, in our leader stats, we're gonna copy this whole section that we did here, the whole money thing. Go a few lines down, paste it, change this into multiplier. Same with the name here, the value beginning, and then in here, we just call it multiplier and set it by default to 1. So what we're doing basically here is doing the same thing as we did for the money, but just calling it multiplier and giving it a base value of 1. Reason we're doing that is our multiplier is what we're going to be using to actually multiply our clicks. So in our clicking code that we have here, that we just made here, after the 1, we're basically just going to be doing times, so the star sign, times leader stats dot multiplier dot value. Now nothing is going to change right away because our multiplier is 1, and 1 times 1 is 1. So yeah, that's not going to do much, is it? So what we're going to be doing is we're going to add a part, which we will actually take off the brick from. Let's just make this smooth plastic. And then let's make the part real quickly. So we're going to be scaling it a little bit to have like a little domain here. Change its transparency to like 0.7 and turning off cast shadow. And make sure it's anchored down here, and can collide is off, which means that a character can actually walk inside of it without getting, you know, stopped. So there's no collision in this. Now inside of our part, we'll call this 2x multiplier. And in our main GUI, we're gonna add a text label, which we'll just center. And we'll call this multiplier display. Add a local script, because we're just trying to display something, we're not changing our value. And since we're changing our value, we're using server script because we want it to actually replicate on the server too. So in our local script, which we did under multiplier display, we're going to be getting the player, which is much easier in our local script, where we can do local player is equal to game.players.local player. This gets the player that's currently playing on that machine, and we don't have to do the parent thing in this, which is much easier. Reason we're doing it in here is we can't get a local player because this script is not local, it's server, which is why it doesn't work here. But yeah, this is basically the same as this, just local. This is more server than anything. Alright, so now that we have the player, we're going to be doing how do we want to do this? So the way I did it before is doing while wait do, which basically runs this infinitely with a wait which is, I think, 0.06, I believe. But we're not going to be using this, right? This is going to be used somewhere else. Let's do this more in an optimized way, because I'm trying to teach you the way I was taught, but then giving you a little bit more of an optimized way of it, so that you're not going to have lag or anything else that's going to hurt your brain later down the line where you have to rewrite all of your code. So yeah, I'll be teaching you more of optimized ways, and so you don't get cheated on by exploiters. So yeah. What we want to be doing is we want to do local leader stats right after the player, which is just equal to player dot leader stats. There you go. Now, we don't want to do it this way, because this runs right as the server starts, which is even before the player. So, after player here, we want to do double colon, wait for child, string, leader stats. So this will wait until there's something called leader stats. So this gives the player enough time to join, load in, and load the leader stats folder. So yeah. So if we have the leader stats, then we continue. But this will not actually work in this case because we're doing it differently. So what we would do is leader stats, the multiplier, double colon, get property, changed signal, brackets, string, value inside of that, and then connect it into a function. There you go. So what this line does, it's basically we're getting the multiplier and we're waiting for the value to change. So every time our multiplier value changes, it fires this line of code, which this is very useful. For example, if you're making a health GUI, mana GUI, stamina, gold, ruby, whatever you're using, right? So this is great to check if a value is being changed. So if our value is being changed, what we want to be doing is, for example, a multiplier display, right? So we would be doing script.parent.text. So we're grabbing our script's parent, which is a text label, and then grabbing its text, and we want to set the text to something. So we would do equals string multiplier equals space. So this is just text right here, so a string. Outside of here, we'll do dot dot leader stats dot multiplier dot value. So what this basically does right here, this line, is we're grabbing our text labels text and setting it to multiplier equals space, and then grabbing the multiplier's value. Reason why we can't just grab this and put it in here is because it's just gonna write it out as it's right here. It's just text, which is why we're adding the dot, which basically says, ayo, we're not done. We want to add this to the text as well. So what it'll look like is just a label as of right now. It's because the text hasn't changed. So if you want to add it, so if you want to display something right away before it even changes, is we copy this and put it outside here. Now this right here will only run once, but this will run as many times as the actual value changes. So yeah, this is what you can use this for. Now inside of here, so if we actually test this, you'll see that label is going to be changing to whatever we set our numbers. So multiplier is equal to 1. So yeah, this is what our multiplier currently is. So that's great. Now inside of a pull part right here, we'll be adding a script, a server script. We're going to be referencing it with a variable, so local part script.parent. Then what we're going to be doing is checking whenever something touches the part, so it enters its collision. So what we would be doing is part.touched connect function given a variable of hit. So we're basically storing whatever touched it as a variable called hit. So if we print this, so if you will print hit, you would see the second we enter its collision, you see it's printing out all of our body parts that are currently hitting its collision. Now, we don't want it to print all of this. We just want to print our player name. So what we would do is, first we want to check if it's actually a character. So the way we would do that is, every player has a humanoid and a humanoid root part, and just any other limbs, but the main ones are always humanoid and humanoid root part. So we'll be using humanoid for this. So if hit.parent, which is basically the hit's parent, so very simple, my head's parent, which is my character, my right upper arm, which is also my character, my right hand, also the character. and then checking if we can find something called humanoid. So if inside of our character, which is hit up parent, if we can find something called humanoid, then we continue. So if we find out something called humanoid, we would print hit up parent.name, which if we go inside of the thingy, it will spam ping our name 16 times because that's how many parts we have in our thing that actually hooks up to our character. So we're getting our name. Now how do we get the player? Because right now we're just getting character, and that's not going to help us get our multiplier. So what we would be doing is doing local player, which is equal to game.players ;, get player from character, which is going to be hit the parent. Now this might be a little confusing for you, but what we're doing here basically is just getting our character on our player from our character, which is a really very easy way of accessing our leader stats or money, multiplier, etc. So this is a really good way if you want to get the player from a character. This is the easiest way I can find. So get it. So if I have the player, we do if player, then continue. Now we can just get the leader stats like I showed you guys before. So local leader stats equal to player.leader stats. You can add a wait for child if you want to, but in this case it won't be necessary. But just for extra safety, you can add it. But the reason I'm not adding it is because we're adding an if leader stats then, which is just if we have the leader stats, then we continue. So if we have the leader stats, we wanna do leader stats dot multiplier dot value plus or just equal that to 2. So we're just gonna set that to 2. Outside of this whole part, so at line 13 hopefully, or just where this end is, we're gonna do part.touch ended. So whenever our collision ends, so if we do function hit, so we're gonna do basically what we just did here, right? So we're gonna copy this whole line, so it looks like this. But instead of putting the multiplier to 2, we put it back to 1. So if we go in, you can see our multiplier is 2. Our UI changes. If we go back out, it's 1 again. Now it's 2. Now it's 1. 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 So actually wait. Now since we already added to a clicking or a multiplier, you can see we get 1 from clicking. You go in here. Now we get 2. So now you can see it's actually buffed. And we get more clicks. We go out. Now we just get a single one again. Now we get more again. Now we got less. Now we got more. Now we got less. Now we got more. And now we got less. So yeah, there you go. Now that's gonna wrap up the first part of our tutorial. This is we're gonna be ending this episode. I will be uploading this raw, completely raw, no editing, no nothing. So everything will be as I did it. If you follow along the tutorial right like as I typed it, so nothing changed, nothing, no names, anything, it'll work like a charm. You can change names of these however you want, but make sure you actually replicating it in the code as well. So for example, if I would call this cash right now, I would have to change it in all of my code. So for example, here money, this would have to be changed to cash, and then it would work smoothly, you know, then it would work again. So now it's called cash. If you click, you see we're still gaining cash. Even when we go into the multiplier, it's because we changed it to cash. So yeah, just make sure whatever you name your thing here, it's all in the code. So our multiplier, I will call this multiplier 2. I would have to change it in each of the code. So just remember that. But yeah, hopefully this teaches you something. I'll be doing more tutorials very, very soon. But yeah, this wraps up for the first tutorial. So hopefully you guys learned something. Enjoy.